The room was quiet in a way that felt too heavy to be natural. Not the peaceful quiet of early morning. Not the gentle quiet of snow falling outside a warm house. This was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and waited. The ceiling fan did not move. The old clock on the wall had stopped sometime during the night. Even the street outside seemed to forget how to breathe. He stood in the center of the room without knowing why he had walked there. The carpet felt cold under his bare feet. A thin line of light slipped through the half-closed blinds and rested across the floor like a warning. Dust floated slowly in the air as if time itself had slowed down. He tried to remember what had pulled him out of bed. There had been a sound. Or maybe a feeling. Something soft but sharp enough to wake him from a deep sleep. His name. He was sure of it now. Someone had said his name. Not loudly. Not like a shout from another room. It had sounded close. Close enough to feel warm against his ear. He swallowed and looked toward the hallway. Nothing moved. The apartment was small. One bedroom. One narrow kitchen. One living room that tried to feel bigger than it really was. He had lived here for 3 years. Long enough to know every sound the building made. The pipes that knocked in winter. The neighbor upstairs who walked too hard. The distant siren that passed every night just after 2. But this sound had not belonged to the building. It had belonged to him. He rubbed his face slowly as if the motion could wake his thoughts. Sleep still clung to the edges of his mind. Dreams fading but not fully gone. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe just the echo of a dream that refused to disappear. Yet the feeling in his chest would not leave. A quiet pull. A question without words. He took a slow breath and listened again. Silence. Still. Heavy. Watching. He told himself to move. To turn on a light. To prove the world was normal. But his body did not listen right away. Because somewhere deep inside, a memory had begun to stir. And that memory carried a weight he had spent years trying to bury. He walked toward the kitchen with careful steps. Each movement slow as if the floor might crack beneath him. The refrigerator hummed softly. A small ordinary sound. Too ordinary. He opened the door and stared at the pale light inside. Leftover takeout. Half a bottle of milk. Nothing important. Nothing that explained why his heart was beating faster than it should. He closed the door gently. The click echoed louder than expected. Again the silence returned. He leaned against the counter and tried to laugh at himself. A short quiet breath that never became real laughter. You are tired. That was the simplest answer. Long hours at work. Too many nights without real sleep. Too much coffee and not enough sunlight. Anyone could imagine hearing their name in the dark. He nodded once as if agreeing with an invisible voice. Yes. That had to be it. Still he did not go back to bed. Instead he walked toward the living room window and pulled the blinds open a little more. Outside the city rested in deep blue shadow. Streetlights glowing like distant islands. A single car moving slowly through an empty intersection. Early morning in an American city always carried a strange loneliness. As if the world had paused between yesterday and today. He used to like this hour. Years ago. Before everything became quiet in the wrong way. Back when mornings meant possibility instead of memory. He pushed that thought away quickly. No reason to go there. Not now. Not ever if he could help it. His reflection stared back from the dark glass. Older than he felt inside. Lines near the eyes that had not been there before. A tiredness that sleep never seemed to fix. He looked away. Another sound drifted through the apartment. Soft. Almost nothing. He froze. Not his name this time. Just a faint shift of air. Like someone moving in another room. But he lived alone. The thought arrived slowly. Carefully. As if afraid to be noticed. He lived alone. No footsteps. No voice. No reason for anything to move. His heartbeat grew louder. He listened harder. Silence answered again. The logical part of his mind stepped forward. Calm and patient. Old buildings make sounds. Wood settles. Pipes breathe. Air moves through walls. Simple. explainable, safe. He repeated those ideas silently until they almost felt true. Almost. Because beneath logic, something else waited. A memory of another night. Another room. Another moment when someone had spoken his name. That memory had changed everything. He closed his eyes tightly. Not now. He was not ready for that road. A sudden vibration broke the stillness. His phone on the table. Screen glowing in the dim room. The sound made him jump more than it should have. He walked over and looked down. No new message. No missed call. Just the alarm he had forgotten to turn off. 6:00 a.m. Morning had officially arrived. Even if the sun had not yet decided to show itself. He turned the alarm off and held the phone in his hand. For a second he considered calling someone. Anyone. Just to hear another human voice. But he did not. Because there was only one person he ever wanted to call during moments like this. And that number had been silent for a very long time. He placed the phone back on the table with care. The quiet returned once more. But it felt different now. Less empty. More expectant. As if the room were waiting for him to understand something important. He did not like that feeling. He grabbed a jacket from the chair. Not because he was cold. But because standing still felt worse. Maybe a walk would help. Fresh air. Movement. Noise from the waking city. Normal things. He slipped on his shoes and moved toward the door. His hand paused on the handle. A strange hesitation. Small but powerful. Leaving the apartment felt simple. Yet something inside whispered to stay. To listen. To wait. He frowned slightly. This was ridiculous. He turned the handle and opened the door. The hallway outside stretched long and empty. Dim yellow lights buzzing softly overhead. The familiar smell of old carpet and distant cooking. Nothing unusual. Nothing mysterious. Just another morning beginning like any other. He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. For a moment he stood there without moving. Listening again. Always listening now. But the building offered only ordinary silence. He exhaled slowly and began walking toward the stairs. Each step carried a faint echo. A reminder that he was alone in the early hour. Halfway down the stairs. He stopped. Because the feeling returned. That quiet pull. That invisible thread tugging gently at his thoughts. He turned his head slightly. Looking back up toward his apartment door. From this angle. The hallway looked longer. Darker. Almost unfamiliar. And for one brief impossible second. He thought he saw movement near the door. Not clear. Not real enough to name. Just a suggestion of shape. Gone before his mind could understand. His chest tightened. He stared harder. Nothing there now. Only the closed door. Silent. Still. He told himself not to be afraid. Because fear meant memory. And memory meant the past. And the past was a place he had promised never to return. Yet one question slipped through his defenses. Soft but unstoppable. If no one was inside the apartment, then who had spoken his name? He stood frozen between going down the stairs and running back to the door. Morning light slowly growing through a distant window. The city beginning to wake. Time moving forward whether he wanted it or not. And somewhere deep inside, a truth he had hidden for years, was beginning to move. Very slowly. Very quietly. Coming closer. He did not know it yet. But this morning, this single strange moment in an empty room, was the beginning of everything changing again. And before the day ended, he would be forced to face a question far more dangerous than a voice in the dark. A question about memory. About guilt. About whether the past ever truly stays buried. Because sometimes, the mind protects us from truth. And sometimes, it calls our name until we finally listen. He took one last look at the silent hallway. Heart unsteady. Breath shallow. And stepped downward into the waiting morning. Not knowing if the voice he heard belonged to memory. Or something that had never left at all. Cold morning air met him at the bottom of the stairwell and wrapped around his face like a quiet warning. The street outside was still half asleep. A delivery truck idled near the corner. Somewhere far away a train horn stretched across the city like a long tired sigh. He stepped onto the sidewalk and pulled his jacket closer even though the cold was not the real reason his body felt tense. Walking usually helped. Movement gave his thoughts somewhere to go. A straight road felt easier than a silent room. He turned left without thinking. The same direction he always walked when sleep refused to return. Past the closed barber shop with faded red stripes on the glass. Past the narrow laundromat that glowed all night like a lonely lighthouse. Past the diner that would open in less than an hour and fill with the smell of coffee and fried eggs and ordinary conversations. Normal places. Safe places. Places where nothing strange was supposed to happen. His footsteps created a soft rhythm on the pavement. Steady. Predictable. He tried to match his breathing to that rhythm. In. Out. Slow. But the memory of the voice stayed close. Not loud. Just present. Like someone walking one step behind him. He told himself again that it had been a dream. People heard things when they were half asleep. Stress could twist the mind in quiet ways. He knew this. He had read about it. He had even explained it to someone once long ago. That thought stopped him for half a second. Long ago. A different life almost. A different version of himself who believed understanding the mind meant he could control his own. He kept walking. The sky slowly shifted from deep blue to a softer grey. Windows above him began to glow one by one as people inside returned to their routines. Coffee brewing. Showers running. News playing softly in the background. The world moving forward without asking permission. He wondered when his own life had stopped feeling like forward motion. There was no single moment he could point to. No clear line between before and after. Just a slow quiet change. Like light fading from a room without anyone noticing. He reached the corner and paused at the crosswalk. A red hand blinked on the signal, telling him to wait. So he waited. Cars passed in thin early traffic, their headlights sliding across the wet pavement from last night rain. For a second he imagined stepping into the street without looking. Not from sadness. Not exactly. More from curiosity. Wondering what silence might feel like if it finally became complete. He pushed the thought away quickly. Almost angrily. That was not who he was. Not anymore. Maybe never. The signal changed. White figure glowing. Safe to cross. He moved forward with the same careful pace. On the other side of the street the diner lights flickered on inside. A worker placing chairs down. Another pouring the first pot of coffee. Warmth waited there. Noise waited there. People who did not know him and would not ask questions. He almost went inside. Almost. But something pulled him to keep walking. That same invisible thread from the hallway. Gentle but impossible to ignore. He followed it without knowing why. Block after block passed quietly. The city slowly waking. A bus groaning to life. A cyclist cutting through the cold air. A dog barking from behind a fence as if announcing the morning to no one. Ordinary sounds. Yet everything felt slightly distant. Like he was watching the world through thick glass. He reached a small park squeezed between two apartment buildings. Nothing special. Just a few benches. Bare trees. A narrow path cutting through frozen grass. Still he stopped there. Because this place carried memory whether he wanted it or not. He had not planned to come here. His feet had chosen it on their own. He stood at the entrance and felt that familiar pressure in his chest. The kind that made breathing shallow. Years had passed. Yet the air felt the same. Quiet. Waiting. Heavy with something unfinished. He walked slowly toward the center bench. Each step careful. As if the ground might break open and reveal everything he had tried not to remember. The bench was empty now. Paint chipped. Wood faded by sun and rain. He sat down without deciding to. Cold seeped through the fabric of his clothes. But he did not move. Because the past had finally caught up. And this place was where it had started to change. Not the beginning. But the moment things became impossible to ignore, he closed his eyes. For a second the present disappeared, replaced by another morning. Warmer, brighter, full of voices and movement. Someone sitting beside him, close enough that their shoulder touched his. A voice laughing softly at something small. Something unimportant. Something that felt huge at the time. He opened his eyes quickly. The bench was empty again. Only wind moving through dry branches above. His throat tightened. He had spent years building distance from these memories, carefully placing them behind walls of routine and silence. Yet one strange voice in the night had cracked those walls open like thin glass. Why now? That question felt louder than anything he had heard. Why after all this time? He leaned forward and pressed his hands together, trying to steady the shaking he did not want to admit. A sound reached him from across the park. Footsteps on gravel. He looked up sharply. An older man walking a slow circle with a small dog. Nothing unusual. Nothing connected to him. Still his heart had reacted before logic could speak. Too alert. Too ready. As if danger were something memory could create on its own. He exhaled slowly and leaned back again. This had to stop. Hearing voices. Seeing shapes in empty hallways. Feeling pulled toward places he avoided for years. This was not just lack of sleep. Something deeper was moving. A truth he had buried. Or maybe a question he never answered. He remembered the last real conversation he had about any of this. A quiet office. Soft lamp light. Someone across from him speaking gently as if words might break. They had asked simple things. How long since the dream started? How often he felt watched. Whether guilt felt heavier at night. He had answered carefully, choosing words that sounded normal. Safe. Incomplete. Because saying everything out loud would have made it real. And he was not ready for real. Maybe he still was not. A cold breeze passed through the park and lifted dry leaves into a slow spiral. For a moment the sound almost resembled whispering. His body went still again. Listening. Waiting. Nothing followed. Just wind. Yet the feeling returned stronger than before. Not fear exactly. Recognition. As if something long silent had begun speaking again in a language only he understood. His name in the dark had not felt random. It had felt personal. Intentional. Like a memory refusing to stay quiet. He looked down at his hands. They were steady now. But they did not feel like his. Detached. Distant. He wondered how many years a person could live beside their own past without turning to face it. Maybe the mind allowed distance only until the truth became too loud. Maybe silence had limits. A sudden realization moved slowly through his thoughts. What if the voice had not come from outside at all? What if it had come from somewhere much closer? The idea settled heavily. Not supernatural. Not impossible. Just dangerous in a different way. Because if the voice belonged to his own mind, then the past was no longer buried. It was awake. And calling. He stood from the bench before the thought could grow deeper. Staying here felt like sinking. He needed noise. Movement. Proof that the present still existed. He walked out of the park faster than before. Breath visible in the cold air. The city was fully waking now. Traffic thicker. Voices drifting from open storefronts. Life continuing without pause. Yet inside him, something had shifted permanently. The question was no longer if he heard his name. The real question was why. And somewhere ahead in the hours waiting to unfold, an answer was already moving toward him. Quiet. Patient. Impossible to avoid. By the end of this day, he would be forced to remember a moment he had spent years trying to erase. A moment connected to this park. To that voice. To the silence that followed. And when that memory finally returned completely, it would change not only what he believed about the past, but what he understood about himself. He did not know yet that the truth waiting for him was far more unsettling than any whisper in an empty room. The noise of the city should have grounded him. Cars passing. Doors opening. voices rising and falling in ordinary rhythm. Instead, it all felt distant, like sound traveling through water. He kept walking without choosing a direction. Just forward. Always forward. As if stopping would allow the past to finally catch his shoulder. The sun lifted slowly between buildings. Soft winter light touching windows and turning them pale gold. People hurried along sidewalks with coffee cups and tired eyes. A school bus hissed at the curb and swallowed a line of children wrapped in bright scarves. Life everywhere. Movement everywhere. Yet inside him something remained frozen in another time. His steps slowed near an intersection he did not plan to reach. A familiar corner. Too familiar. Across the street stood a narrow brick building with tall windows. Clean now. Renovated. Trying to look new. But memory ignored fresh paint. He felt it before he fully understood. This place. His chest tightened the way it had in the park. Only stronger. Sharper. Certain. He had not come here in years. Not since the day everything fractured into before and after. For a moment he considered turning away. Pretending he had never noticed. Choosing distance again. His body did not move. Because the invisible thread pulling him since morning had led exactly here. And threads like that rarely ended without reason. He stood at the curb while the signal counted down in glowing red numbers. Each second loud inside his head. 10. 9. 8. His breathing grew shallow. 7. 6. Memories pressed closer. Still blurred. Still incomplete. But no longer silent. 5. 4. A sound echoed faintly inside his thoughts. Not from the street. Not from the present. A voice from years ago. Soft. Careful. Saying his name the same way he had heard it in the dark apartment. 3. 2. His heart pounded so hard he almost missed the moment the signal changed. 1. White figure glowing. Permission to cross. He did not move immediately. Crossing felt like stepping into something permanent. Something waiting. Cars slowed. Drivers glanced with brief impatience. The world urging him forward. Finally he stepped off the curb. Each stride heavy. Measured. Unavoidable. The distance across the street felt longer than it should. Like walking through memory instead of air. When he reached the other side he stopped again. Only a few feet from the entrance. Glass doors reflected the morning light. And his own face staring back. Older. More tired. Carrying years that never fully passed. His hand trembled slightly before he noticed. He pressed it into his pocket to hide the movement from no one. Why here? Why today? The question repeated without answer. Yet something deeper already knew. Because this was where the last normal morning of his life had begun. And where the silence afterward had never truly ended. A couple walked out of the building laughing softly. Brushing past him without seeing anything unusual. To them it was only an office. Another place of work. Another ordinary address in a busy city. To him it was a doorway to a memory he had locked away piece by piece. He watched the doors close again. For a long moment he simply stood there breathing. In. Out. Trying to slow the storm rising under his ribs. Part of him whispered to leave. To protect the fragile distance he had built. Another part. Quieter but stronger. Told him the distance had already disappeared. Because the voice in the apartment had not been random. It had been a call backward. And he had followed. Without meaning to. Without understanding. Until now. He pushed the door open. Warm air touched his face. Carrying the faint smell of paper and coffee and cleaning solution. A familiar mixture that made his stomach twist. The lobby looked different. New desk. Different colors. Different people moving through morning routine. Yet beneath the changes, the shape of the place remained the same. Memory filled the gaps easily. He stepped inside slowly, as if sudden movement might break something fragile. No one paid attention. Just another person entering a building at the start of a workday. Ordinary. If only ordinary were true. His eyes moved across the room searching without permission. Looking for something he could not name. Or maybe something he feared to find. Near the far wall stood a hallway leading deeper inside. Quiet. Dimmer. Untouched by the bright windows. The sight of it sent a sharp pulse through his chest. Because that hallway lived clearly in memory. Even after all these years. He had walked down it once on a morning that felt completely normal. And walked back out into a life that never felt normal again. His feet carried him forward before doubt could stop them. Step by step toward the hallway. The sounds of the lobby faded behind him. Replaced by softer echoes. Air thicker with stillness. Each movement stirred fragments of the past. A conversation half remembered. A worried expression. A question he had not answered honestly. Pieces floating without order. He reached the entrance of the hallway and paused. The light here was weaker. Shadows stretching along the floor. Silence deeper than the busy city outside. His pulse roared in his ears. For a second he felt certain he should not continue. That some doors stayed closed for a reason. But another feeling pushed forward. Not courage. Not exactly. Something closer to inevitability. He walked into the hallway. Every step awakened more memory. Not clear yet. But closer. Like shapes forming through fog. A door halfway down. Closed in the present. Open in the past. Voices inside. Low. Serious. His name spoken again. The same tone. The same careful softness he heard in the apartment hours earlier. Recognition struck hard enough to steal his breath. This was the moment. The origin of the voice. Not a dream. Not imagination. A memory returning piece by piece. He stopped walking. Because he suddenly knew what waited at the end of remembering. And he was not sure he could face it standing. His hand pressed against the wall for balance. Cold surface. Real. Present. He focused on that sensation to keep from drifting fully backward. But the past was stronger now. Pulling. Opening. Refusing silence. Images flashed behind his eyes. A chair. A window with rain sliding down the glass. Someone sitting across from him holding words too heavy to say quickly. Guilt rising before he understood why. His breathing turned uneven. He had spent years avoiding this exact hallway inside his own mind. Yet here he was. Standing in its center. With nowhere left to step except forward. A faint sound reached him. Soft. Almost hidden. His body froze. Because the sound had not come from memory. It came from ahead. From the present hallway. A whisper of movement. Or maybe breath. Impossible. Yet undeniable. Slowly. Carefully. He lifted his head. The corridor remained empty. Doors closed. Lights dim. Nothing visibly wrong. Still the feeling of presence remained. Watching. Waiting. And deep inside. The same quiet voice from morning seemed to echo again. Calling him toward the final door. Toward the truth he had buried. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and something stranger. Relief. Because running was exhausting. And maybe, just maybe, knowing would hurt less than wondering forever. He took another step. Then another. Closer to the place where memory and reality were about to meet. He did not know what he would find. Only that the past was no longer silent. And whatever waited behind the last door would finally answer the question that began in an empty room before dawn. Why his name had been spoken. And who, or what, had never stopped calling it. The last door stood only a few steps away. Plain wood. Faded handle. Nothing about it looked important. Yet the air around it felt heavier than anywhere else in the hallway. As if time itself had slowed here and refused to move forward. He stopped just short of touching it. His heartbeat was no longer a rhythm. It was a force. Loud. Unsteady. Demanding to be heard. For years he had imagined this moment in quiet flashes. Usually at night. Usually when sleep would not come. In those thoughts he always turned around before reaching the door. Always escaped before memory became clear. But this time there was no turning back. Because the voice from the empty room had followed him here. Step by step. breath by breath. He lifted his hand slowly. Even that small movement felt difficult, like pushing against deep water. His fingers hovered near the handle without closing around it. A single question moved through his mind. If he opened the door, would the past finally become real again? And if it did, would he survive remembering? His chest tightened. For a brief second he considered leaving. Walking out of the building. Out of the city. Out of every place that carried history. But another thought answered immediately. You already tried that. Distance had not erased anything. Silence had not healed anything. Time had only buried the truth deeper where it could grow in the dark. The voice in the apartment proved that. Running was finished. Only truth remained. His hand finally touched the handle. Cold metal against warm skin. A simple sensation. Yet it sent a sharp tremor through his arm. He closed his eyes as the memory surged forward without permission. Rain against glass. Grey morning light. A chair across from him. And someone speaking carefully, choosing each word as if the wrong one might break the world. He heard that voice again now. Not in the hallway. Not in imagination. Inside memory. Telling him something he had refused to accept. Something final. His eyes opened suddenly. The hallway returned. Silent. Empty. But the past was no longer blurry. It waited just beyond the door. He pushed the handle down. The latch released with a soft sound that felt impossibly loud. For a moment he could not move further, because opening the door meant stepping into the exact point where his life had split apart. Before and after. Slow breath in. Slow breath out. Then he pushed the door open. The room inside was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe memory had made it larger to hold the weight of that day. A single window. Closed blinds. Dust floating in thin light. Different furniture now. Different colors. Yet the shape of the space remained unchanged. And that shape unlocked everything. The past rushed in fully this time. No longer fragments. No longer shadows. Clear. Sharp. Unavoidable. He was sitting in the chair again. Hands clasped too tightly. Trying to appear calm. Across from him sat the only person whose opinion had ever truly mattered. Eyes tired from worry. Voice gentle but firm. Asking questions he did not want to answer honestly. Not because he wanted to lie, but because truth felt too dangerous to speak aloud. He had said he was fine. That the sleepless nights meant nothing. That the heavy thoughts would pass. Even while knowing those words were not real. The memory tightened around his chest. Because he could feel the exact moment everything changed. The silence after his answers. The look of quiet understanding on the other face. As if they already knew the truth he was hiding. And then, that sentence. Soft. Careful. Impossible to forget. His name spoken first. The same way he heard it in the apartment. Followed by words that carried both fear and love. Words telling him something was wrong. That he needed help. That pretending would only make the darkness deeper. He remembered the anger rising fast. Not true anger. Just fear wearing a louder mask. He had stood up too quickly. Chair scraping harsh against the floor. Saying he did not need help. Saying everything was under control. Even as control slipped further away each day. The memory moved faster now. Rain louder outside. Voices sharper. Pain hidden inside ordinary sentences. Until the final moment. The moment he spent years refusing to see clearly. A step toward the door. A pause. A last attempt from the other voice calling his name again. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just full of worry. Full of hope he would turn back. He had not turned. That was the truth. He had walked out. Leaving concern behind. Leaving help behind. Leaving the last safe chance behind. The memory stopped there for years. Like a film burned before the ending. But now it continued. Because truth no longer allowed silence. The hallway outside that day. The sound of rain following him. The strange hollow feeling growing inside his chest. And later. The phone call. His breathing became uneven in the present room. He did not want to hear that part again. Yet it came anyway. A voice shaking, telling him there had been an accident, telling him someone had been hurt, telling him the person who tried to help him, the one who spoke his name with care, was gone. The word gone echoed through memory without sound. Everything after that dissolved into numb grey silence. Funeral. Condolences. Days blending together without meaning. And beneath it all, one unbearable truth. The last conversation between them had been anger. Not gratitude. Not goodbye. Anger. Guilt settled into his life quietly after that. Not loud. Not visible. Just constant. Like a shadow that never moved with the sun. He had tried to bury it under routine. Under work. Under years of pretending forward motion meant healing. But guilt does not disappear. It waits. And sometimes, it learns how to speak. His knees felt weak in the present room. He reached for the wall to steady himself. The realization formed slowly but completely. The voice in the apartment. The whisper in the park. The pull toward this building. None of it was random. It was memory demanding to be faced. Guilt demanding to be heard. Love demanding to be acknowledged even after loss. His name had been spoken because part of him was still standing in this room. Still trapped in the moment before everything ended. Tears blurred his vision though he had not cried in years. The room around him remained quiet. Gentle. Almost patient. As if waiting for him to finally say what he never said. A single sentence rose inside his chest. Heavy. Fragile. He tried to speak but no sound came at first. Only breath shaking. Only years of silence breaking slowly. When the words finally reached his lips, they were barely louder than air. I am sorry. The sound felt small in the empty room. Yet something inside him shifted the moment it was spoken. Not healed. Not finished. But open. For the first time since that day, the guilt did not feel sealed in darkness. It felt seen. And in that fragile opening, a new question quietly appeared. If the voice had brought him back to face the past, then what was supposed to happen next? Because apologies spoken into empty rooms do not change history. But maybe, just maybe, they can change what comes after. He wiped his face slowly, breathing still uneven, heart still heavy. Yet beneath the pain, there was the faintest unfamiliar sensation. Not relief. Something gentler. Like the first thin light before sunrise. He looked around the room one more time. Not with fear now, but with quiet understanding. The past had not called him here to punish. It had called him to finish what was left unfinished. And somewhere beyond this moment, beyond guilt, beyond silence, a different ending might still be waiting. He did not know what that ending would look like, only that the next step mattered. And for the first time in many years, taking a step forward did not feel impossible. He remained in the quiet room long after the words faded into the air. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden sound. No sign that the past had hurt him. Yet something inside had changed in a way that felt deeper than noise. For years his memories had been locked behind a single moment. The argument. The door closing. The phone call that followed. Everything after that had lived in shadow. Untouched. Unspoken. Now the shadow was thinner. Pain was still there. Sharp in places. Heavy in others. But it was no longer hidden in darkness. It was visible. Real. Breathing beside him instead of chasing from behind. He slowly lowered himself into the nearest chair. The same position as years ago. But not the same person sitting in it. Back then he had been afraid of truth. Afraid that admitting weakness would make the world collapse. Now he understood something quieter. Something stronger. Truth had been the only thing that could have saved him. And maybe, even now, truth was the only thing that could let him live differently. A soft sound of movement drifted from the hallway outside. Someone passing. A normal morning continuing. The world had not paused for his memories. It never had. For the first time, that realization did not feel cruel. It felt honest. Life keeps moving, even when grief stands still. He placed his hands on his knees and took a slow, steady breath. Then another. Each breath felt slightly easier than the one before. Not light, not free, but possible. Possible was enough for now. His eyes moved toward the window where thin daylight slipped through the blinds. Dust floating in quiet patterns. Years ago he had left this room believing the story was over. Believing loss had written the final line. Standing here now, he felt something different. Not an ending. Not exactly. More like a page that had never been finished. Waiting patiently. Through silence. Through guilt. Through time. Waiting for him to return and keep writing. The thought was fragile. Easy to doubt. Yet it stayed. Because the voice that called his name in the dark had not sounded like punishment. It had sounded like invitation. An invitation to remember fully. To feel honestly. To speak the words he buried. And maybe, to forgive the person who walked out of this room years ago. Forgiveness felt like the hardest word of all. He did not know if he deserved it. He did not know if it was even possible. But for the first time, he allowed the question to exist without pushing it away. That alone felt like movement. He stood slowly from the chair. The room looked smaller now. Less powerful. Just walls. Just light. Just air holding old echoes. Memory would always live here. Nothing could change that. But memory did not have to be a prison. It could also be a beginning. He walked toward the door and paused with his hand on the frame. Years ago he had rushed out, carrying anger like armor. Today he stepped forward quietly, carrying something softer. Grief. Yes. But also understanding. In the hallway the light seemed brighter than before. Or maybe his eyes were simply seeing differently. Each step toward the exit felt steady. Grounded. Real. No invisible thread pulling him backward now. Only the simple motion of walking ahead. When he reached the lobby, the sounds of morning wrapped around him again. Phones ringing softly. Footsteps crossing polished floors. Low conversations about ordinary things. Ordinary no longer felt empty. It felt precious. Outside the front door's sunlight had fully reached the street. Cars moving with purpose. People carrying coffee and plans and small worries. Life in motion. He stepped onto the sidewalk and paused. Cold air touched his face just like earlier. But it felt different now. Cleaner somehow. Easier to breathe. He looked up at the wide open sky between buildings. For years he had avoided looking up. As if hope might be dangerous. Now the sky was simply sky. Nothing more. Nothing less. And that simplicity felt like a gift. A memory surfaced gently. Not painful this time. A voice from long ago laughing softly on a park bench. Telling him that healing was rarely loud. Rarely sudden. Most of the time. Healing was quiet. So quiet people almost missed it. He understood those words now. Because nothing inside him felt dramatic. Just a small shift. Like a door opening somewhere deep in the dark. Small, but real. He began to walk without rushing. No destination in mind. The city moved around him in warm, ordinary rhythm. A bus sighing to a stop. Someone holding a door for a stranger. Music drifting faintly from a passing car. Simple moments. The kind he had ignored for years. Today he noticed them. Each one proof that the present existed. That time had not ended with loss. When he reached the corner near the small park, his steps slowed. The bench was still there beneath bare branches, waiting in quiet patience. He watched it from a distance. Before, that place had been only pain. Now it felt like something else too. Connection. Memory. Love that had not disappeared even after goodbye. He walked into the park and sat on the bench carefully. Cold wood beneath him. Soft wind moving through trees. He closed his eyes. Not to escape. Just to feel the moment fully. Breath in. Breath out. For the first time in many years. Silence did not feel heavy. It felt calm. And in that calm, he listened gently. No whisper calling his name. No echo from the past. Only wind. Only distant city sounds. Only the steady rhythm of his own breathing. The voice had done what it came to do. It had brought him back. Made him remember. Helped him speak. Now it was quiet. Not gone. Just resting. The way grief rests when it is finally allowed to be seen. He opened his eyes slowly. Sunlight filtered through thin branches, touching the ground in soft moving shapes. A new day fully awake. He did not feel healed. Not completely. Maybe no one ever does. But he felt present. And presence was something he had been missing for a very long time. He understood now that the past would always be part of him. Not an enemy. Not a shadow to outrun. Just a chapter. One that hurt. One that mattered. One that shaped the person still walking forward. The future remained uncertain. Quiet. Unwritten. For the first time. That uncertainty did not feel frightening. It felt open. He rested his hands on the bench beside him, feeling the solid truth of the moment. Then he stood. No dramatic music. No sudden revelation. Just a simple decision. To keep walking. Step by step. Breath by breath. Day by day. Carrying memory. Carrying love. Carrying the quiet understanding that even broken stories can continue. As he left the park, sunlight followed across the path. Warm. Steady. Real. He did not look back this time. Because forward was no longer something to fear. And somewhere deep inside, where silence once lived, a new voice had begun to form. Not calling from darkness. Not filled with guilt. Just calm. Just patient. Reminding him with every step that hearing your name in an empty room is not always a sign of something lost. Sometimes it is the sound of yourself, finally ready to come home.